I'm going to show you a fatty liver fix that is so fast it'll make your head spin. Within 6 days, less than a week, you can drop 31% of the fat from your liver. I'm going to show you how. Do you have to get an MRI at the hospital? No. Do you have to get an ultrasound? Not necessarily. There are simple things you can do to know if you have a fatty liver. If you have belly fat, what that fat is, it's called visceral fat, and that is fat that's spilled over from your liver filling up with fat. One of the challenges when you go to the doctor with fatty liver is they will tell you just to lose weight. That is not necessarily the best advice. I'm going to give you much better advice because a fatty liver is not a fat problem. It's a liver problem. And you have to know what to do to remove the fat off the liver. And out of all the parts of your body that are fat, the liver will shed the fat the fastest, which is the good news. The bad news, well, there's actually not bad news if you understand how to do it. So I'm going to get into it right now. You don't get a fatty liver from just eating fat. You get it from eating a very specific type of sugar called fructose, mainly. The unique thing about fructose is that it can really only be metabolized by your liver, whereas glucose can be broken down and used by all of your cells. So when you consume fructose, it can only be dealt with from this liver, and if you're consuming a lot of it, it can really not just fill up the liver with fat, it can damage the liver itself. So in other words, fructose can be converted to fat in the liver, and then it creates damage, inflammation, and then that's what leads to the scar tissue. You know, we've been taught for 40 years to avoid fat, avoid red meat. Told that we can actually do more carbohydrates and juice and pasta and cereals and crackers and biscuits. It was part of our food pyramid in the 90s. Very bad advice because that is what caused a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's coming from the carbohydrates. And what's really wild about this is when you do an ultrasound or an MRI on the liver, they can detect how much that liver is filled with fat. But the good news is if you can catch it in time, there's a way to remove that fat extremely fast. But if you really don't know what to do, the fat will come right back and cause the same problem. But I'm going to show you what to do. There was a study put out by PNAS. Researchers took people with a fatty liver and put them on a very specific diet for less than a week, just 6 days. Measured their livers with an MRI before and after. Less than a week later, the liver fat had dropped on average by 31%. And you don't need to go get an MRI at this point. But by the end of this video, you'll know what to do, you'll know what to eat, you'll know what to avoid. But this is not about losing weight. This is about knowing what to do to turn down the dial of this fat dumping into the liver. Now, there's 3 simple ways to determine if you have fat in the liver. I've already mentioned the belly, okay? If your belly is protruded, but also the back of your neck. If you look in the mirror and you can look in the back of your neck, if your neck is darker or it feels very velvety and kind of like the skin is kind of thick, or your groin or your armpits have darkened skin and it has like a velvety type feel to it, suspect you have a fatty liver. Or skin tags. All 3 of these indicate you have high insulin. And if you have high insulin, you're going to have a fatty liver. So the question is why? Well, high insulin causes a lot of storage of fat, especially in the liver. And what happens when the liver gets damaged because of all the refined carbohydrates, you develop resistance against insulin. So what that means in simple terms, the pancreas that's making insulin has no turnoff and it starts just flooding the body with so much insulin. That excess insulin just causes a massive storage of fat on the liver. So a lot of people ask me, what supplements do I recommend? Now, of course, I'm not biased of my own high quality supplement line, but if you go to Amazon and type Dr. Berg supplements, you'll find more information. Now, I want you to do something. You can either pause the video right now or do this at the end of the video, but I want you to take a tape measure and measure around your waist at the level of the belly button, and you're going to write down that number. 2 days later, we're going to measure it again. And then in 72 hours, it's 3 days, you're going to measure it. And then in 6 days, you're going to measure it. And at 6 days, it should be at least 2 inches smaller. But at 48 hours, you should see at least a 1/2 inch shrinkage in your midsection. What's fascinating about people with liver damage is they don't usually die of liver failure. They usually die of either a heart attack or a stroke. Why? Because the same thing that's causing inflammation in the liver is also creating inflammation in your arteries. These refined carbohydrates and sugars are not just doing to the liver, they're doing it to the entire body. As you do this, you just might find that if you have high blood pressure, that's going to start coming down. If you have higher cholesterol, that'll start balancing out. If you have fatigue, you'll start having more energy. If you have sleep apnea, you're going to find that's doing much better. But the problem with the fatty liver is there's not a lot of symptoms. You can visually see it by these indicators, but people don't usually feel it until the later stages. This is based on some research. I'm going to put the links down below. But in one study, liver fat began to drop in just 2 days by restricting carbohydrates. Second study, the children's experiment, UCSF researchers took 41 kids with fatty liver, kept their calories exactly the same. Okay, not less, not more. One thing they did change, they swapped out fructose for starch. Now, starch is mainly glucose. About 9 days later, a little longer than a week, using an MRI showed that the liver fat dropped almost 50% in these children. And so I just want to emphasize it's not really good for you, and especially your kids, to drink juice. Of course, the obvious one is the soda, especially with the high fructose corn syrup. That's like really bad. But juice isn't much better, okay? Kids, adults need to avoid it. Why? Because it's loaded with fructose. Now, the third study, which is surprising for a lot of people, involves coffee. Yeah. A study following over 200,000 adults compared coffee drinkers with non-coffee drinkers, okay? And people who drink coffee had a 46% lower risk of dying from chronic liver disease. That's mind-blowing, right? It's the polyphenols in the coffee. Of course, you don't want to add sugar to your coffee, but coffee is somewhat protective. Now, I'm not pushing coffee, but personally, I am addicted to it. I only drink 1 a day, but it does tend to support liver function. I would recommend drinking organic coffee though, because they do use a lot of pesticides. The polyphenols, which are plant-based chemicals in coffee, are anti-inflammatory. So if someone does have inflammation, it can kind of help lower that. Study 4, which has to do with walking, and this is from Penn State researchers who pooled 14 different studies, over 550 patients, all had MRIs, and they found it reduced liver fat by 30% on average, okay, without any significant weight loss. When you walk, you actually improve the function of the liver, which is fascinating. Okay, what can you do to drop fat off your liver very fast? Number 1, you want to reduce your carbohydrates, especially bringing your fructose down to 0. So lowering your carbs below 20 grams per day is going to be probably the most powerful, significant thing you could possibly do. Number 2, 3 egg yolks a day. Okay, I would recommend eating the whole egg, but the egg yolks are filled with choline that accelerates the removal of fat from your liver. So I want you to consume 3 eggs for your breakfast, but I wouldn't even have a breakfast. I would have that for your first meal at lunch, because I want you to consume only 2 meals a day with no snacks. That's just going to take it to the next level and speed it up even faster. Number 3, 1 coffee a day, but just realize that coffee can reduce your inflammation. I would not recommend adding sugar, but you can add some cream. And number 4, a 20-minute walk every single day. So a lot of people ask me, what supplements do I recommend? Now, of course, I'm not biased of my own high-quality supplement line, but if you go to Amazon and type Dr. Berg supplements, you'll find more information.